Hello, this is Tero Pesonen from TCCA, talking together with Balazs, the 3GPP RAN chair, on the update of RAN 89 e-meeting to hear what is happening. So go ahead, Balazs. Let us know what are the news and what's important for critical communications.
Well, thank you very much, Tero, for the kind introduction. And indeed, I'd like to give you a bit of an update on what has happened in the last plenary meeting on the radio side. So we had the electronic RAN plenary. The live in 3GPP is still very much electronic. And we had our latest electronic RAN plenary just 2 weeks ago. And let me give you an update on that. So these are the main topics that I'd like to go and present to you today. So time plan, the different releases and technical topics. And moving on to the first topic is the endorsed RAN meeting plan. So essentially our plan, given the situation around the world and given the expectation that we will have to stay in an electronic mode at least until summer next year, we are actually planning all our meetings until June next year as electronic meetings by default. So you can see here the meeting calendar with the TSGs in red in their usual places at the end of each quarter, December, March, and June. And then we have the different working group meetings, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, mostly in the middle of those periods. Now, the point to note from here is we're going to have a single set of working group meetings in Q4 and Q1, so the upcoming 2 quarters. But then in Q2 2021, we're actually planning for 2 working group meetings. And as you can see, we have these grayed out inactive periods in each quarter, and those are really trying to help the machinery, the 3GPP standards machinery, for companies to go back and evaluate and reevaluate concepts. It's very similar to what happens in normal face-to-face life. You have face-to-face meetings, then you go back home, do your research meetings, design meetings, and then you come back and do your next set of meetings. But with electronic meetings, sometimes the topics never end and the discussions never end in 3GPP. So we wanted to inject these dedicated inactive periods to have a similar kind of rhythm as we normally have with the face-to-face meetings. Then moving on to release 16, and release 16 stability is of course a big topic, especially that we have been forced to finalize our release 16 already electronically earlier this year. And with respect to the stability of specifications, after analysis and understanding on the RAN side, we are basically trying to clarify that it's the September version of the specifications one should use if they would wish to implement release 16. So even though we froze release 16 already earlier, the actual version implementers and those companies who want to deploy release 16 would need to use the September version of the specifications. And we have added notes on this front to the specification webpage to make this clear. Now, in terms of approving changes in future meetings, the bar for potential non-backwards compatible changes to release 16 is going to be very high. So we're going to be making our utmost to make sure all the changes or all the corrections we make will be backwards compatible. Now, in some specific cases, we might still decide to do non-backwards compatible changes. It's hard to say up front, but in those cases, these will be clearly motivated and described, and the reasons for that change or for those changes will be clearly described on the CR cover sheet to make sure the industry understands why things were done in a certain way. Then in terms of the release 17 timeline, so on the RAN side, we haven't made any adjustments this time around, but of course the understanding is that we will have to make some adjustments given the expanded electronic era for 3GPP meetings. And we're going to have that discussion and decision in December. Now, in preparation to that, the RAN leadership is going to do a detailed analysis of the situation with available time units, feature objectives, different study item deadlines, etc. And we're going to make a detailed plan on how to finish all the work within the Release 17 package. And the initial understanding is that we will need another 6-month delay to the Release 17 timeline, given the COVID situation. But the understanding is that we will be able to, in the optimal case, we will be able to fulfill such a timeline with a 6-month delay. And again, we're going to present a plan of how to do that in December, and then the formal decision on the actual timeline of Release 17 will be done at the December plenary. For me, the most important thing is not so much the timeline decision and the adjustment, but that we're able to put a plan behind it that makes that timeline decision viable. So that to me is the most important element here. Now moving on to some Release 15 critical corrections, and one of the elements coming from the field is that a certain batch of devices was found to be misbehaving in the area of system information block handling. Now, I'd like to stress the fact that this is not an error in the spec in any way. The spec is, of course, very much correct when it comes to system information block handling, but a certain batch of devices misimplemented the SIP handling. But unfortunately, those devices tend to be devices that are very hard to update and upgrade over the air. These are legacy devices, oftentimes IoT devices, and their update over the air is just not feasible. So even though this is not a specification error, what we decided to do is to provide a solution in the specs for those devices not to be barred from the cells because of incorrect SIP handling. And we have approved CRs to alleviate this issue and to allow these devices to still continue to operate and not get barred from the cell. So, of course, the understanding is that this is not really an optimal situation. This shouldn't be interpreted as a blueprint for similar errors in any way. So we certainly hope that this is a one-off where we would, fix an error that is clearly caused by an implementation issue with a specification change. Now, one element here is we might actually get similar error reports from the field going forward. Actually, back in the UMTS era, we created a TR for early UE handling that described certain workarounds for certain batches of devices in the early deployment phase of the new generation. And we might actually decide to do something similar. We're going to take this discussion again in December, and we'll see what sort of overall handling we might actually introduce on the RAN side for the similar cases. In terms of Release 16, some important notable technical topics that is interesting for all of you. On the 6 GHz spectrum band, we found a consensus way forward. Now, the interesting situation with the 6 GHz band is that different regions decided to go different ways when it comes to utilizing this band. In the US, the 6 GHz band is entirely unlicensed. In China, the expectation is that the entire band would be licensed. And then Europe is in the middle. Part of it will be unlicensed and part of it will be licensed. So, and also the regulations in these different regions are in the different stages of maturity. Now, 3GPP has never taken any stand on any band. It doesn't have a favorite, it doesn't have a less favorite. We basically always made sure that all the band specification work for all the bands where our technology, cellular technology, can work was done in 3GPP. And we continue to be very neutral, proactively neutral on this front. So 3GPP continues to make sure that all the different specification work will be done for all the different flavors of the 6 GHz band. And in this particular case, we have approved work items already, even for those band specifications where the regulation doesn't yet exist. Now, we don't typically do that, but again, to give the right perception towards the outside world that 3GPP is ready to make all the specification work for all these different flavors of the same band, we found this to be a good way forward. But of course, the work itself will only be started once the regulations are clear and stable. Now, another interesting technical topic is the way 3GPP has decided to go about an external request to do some simulations pertaining to two important features. So 5G ACIA requested 3GPP to do some simulations on the performance of ultra-reliable low latency and industrial IoT. And the reason this may be interesting to critical communications industry as a whole is that this might actually serve as a blueprint to do something similar for some other segments and on other features in the future. So we'll see how successful and how useful this exercise will be. But RAN has decided to take this request on board. We're going to do a 6-month and outperformance simulation and analysis. It will be managed on the plenary level. The actual technical discussions will take place on the RAN1 and our mailing list. And hopefully it will yield a useful set of results that will be useful for 5G ACIA going forward. Then on some notable release 17 technical topics. On the NR multicast broadcast, there was a bit of a debate to potentially change the scope or downscope some of the broadcast work. Now this wasn't done, so the scope is unchanged. Broadcast is still very much part of the NR multicast broadcast release 17 work. On the RAN side, there are clearly some differences of opinion as to what is actually meant by broadcast from the RAN perspective. And we expect some further discussion on this on the RAN side to make this clear when the work starts in RAN 3 and RAN 2. Non-public networks, that's very much a feature that is driven by the core side, by SA2 in particular. But what we decided in RAN is that we will do all the RAN counterparts for this work. So the main message from here is that the non-public networks, all the different functional elements that is needed to operate 5G-based non-public networks is going to be there in specifications. And again, this kind of network could prove to be rather important in some of the critical communication segments as well, especially on the private front, let it be airports, subway, etc. Still on the release 17, we have approved a work package for RAN 4 on the non-spectrum elements. And I'd like to just highlight one piece of work from here that may be interesting for critical communication, and that's the work on new channel bandwidths. Now, this work is very much motivated by some operator consolidations in some of the regions, resulting in consolidation of available spectrum assets, and those spectrum assets resulting in some odd channel bandwidths like 12.5 or 33. And for those consolidated operators to be able to take full advantage of all their spectrum assets, 3GPP is going to standardize the support for these sort of seemingly odd channel bandwidths. Now, the reason this may be interesting for critical communications is that based on past experience, in some countries and regions, the regulations might actually result in some odd channel bandwidths for critical comms. So the fact that 3GPP has taken this work on board and has endorsed the fact that we need to support some peculiar channel bandwidths with 5G NR might prove to be very useful also for critical communications. And that was the last topic I had in mind, Tero. So I don't know if you have any questions or if there's anything else you'd like to hear from me today.
Thank you very much, Balazs. I think that was very, very important, relevant update for us in critical communication on the work in RAN. And like always, I'd like to encourage all the audience to invest in standards, invest in bringing and participating, bringing yourself and participating in the work in standardization, including RAN. We can see that there's an enormous amount of work to be done, and we need to be active in order to make sure that it reaches the goal and we get the deployments in place. So thank you very much, Balazs, and best of success to leading the hard work.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Tero.